Hello and welcome. These audio recordings are designed for students sitting the CIE IGCSE History exam, and we'll go over some of the more common Paper 4 questions. You may find it useful to have a pen and paper to hand, or you might just want to listen through as part of your revision. That's okay too. Today we will be looking at the following question. Through what methods of control did the Nazis rule? Now, technique, as you know, is different for a Paper 4, and Paper 4 is worth 27% of your overall grade. That's nearly 3 grades, so it's important we get it right. You have 1 hour, so it's a proper essay, unlike the Part C Paper 1 questions where you normally get about 20-25 minutes. And so your technique and your subject knowledge should be more advanced. Now, as we say, you have a choice of 2 questions to answer. Normally, one will be on the Weimar Republic and one on the Nazi period. But you must revise both and be prepared for either question, because there have been years in the past when there have been 2 Weimar or 2 Nazi questions, and you don't want to get stuck. So let's get started. Through what methods of control did the Nazis rule? As with any good Paper 4, you should have a short, concise introduction that follows the DCO rule. That is to say, define the key terms in the question, give context, a short amount will suffice, and then outline your scope, or your PEEs if you prefer. For this question, we would define what we understand by the term control, and you may wish to explain that you know there's an argument that the Nazis had a totalitarian society. You then need to give a little bit of context, and you might for this like to point to events that happen just before the time frame that we're writing about. In other words, you may wish to talk about the Reichstag fire and the enabling act that followed it, and how this set up the period of Nazi consolidation of power. Finally, we will finish our introduction by outlining our scope, which in this case includes the following 4 points, each of which we're looking at writing about 12 minutes on. So our scope is ideological appeal, use of terror and intimidation, use of propaganda, and crushing of opposition. Point 1. Ideological appeal. Evidence you could use for this point includes the Nazis wanted to revise the hated Treaty of Versailles. They also wanted to unite all German speakers into a greater German Reich. As well as this, they wrote in 1924 in Mein Kampf of the desire for Lebensraum, or living space. That is, the idea of acquiring more territory in the east in order to expand Germany. The Nazis also put forward the idea of Volksgemeinschaft, a natural organic community, and this idea of socially reconstructing Germany into a folk community held great appeal for many. The Nazis also spoke of their ideology of racial purity, and Hitler sought to create a superior Aryan race. Indeed, Daniel Jonah Goldhagen argues in his book Hitler's Willing Executioners that the entire nation was involved and wrapped up in this. So in explaining our first point, you may wish to argue that the Nazis had significant ideological appeal. You need only look at the murder of Hedwig Goebbels, one of Joseph Goebbels' children, to understand how strong this ideological appeal was, and it was certainly one method through which the Nazis controlled the German state. Point 2. Use of terror and intimidation. There is plenty of evidence to support this point. The Gestapo, the SS, were both organisations which held the Nazi state together. The Nazis purged the police and the legal system. There were 18 concentration camps, 6 of which were wholly dedicated to killing and which were based in Poland. The Decree for the Protection of People and the State in February 1933 allowed indefinite detention without trial. The Gestapo was dependent on denunciations by ordinary Germans. For example, in Würzburg, 54% of all race-related charges were by private citizens. The SS, or Schutzstaffel, became powerful after the Night of the Long Knives. Their main duties were to run the camps and enforce racial policies. And the SD, or Security Service, set up in 1931, was in charge of gathering intelligence and monitoring public opinion. Heinrich Himmler was in control of all 3 sections, the Gestapo, the SS, and the SD. And so in explaining this point, you may wish to argue that the evidence suggests that the Nazis used terror and intimidation to control and manipulate the German people. Point 3. Use of propaganda. Now, it's important in your evidence here that you make reference to Joseph Goebbels. He set up the Ministry for Popular Enlightenment and Propaganda in 1933. Nazi propaganda targeted a wide range of groups, offering subsidies, jobs, defence, and a revival of Germany. All radio broadcasting was under Nazi control, and their messages were short and simple. Verlag, a Nazi publishing house, controlled 66% of the press by 1939. News and film had to pass through Nazi censorship, and educating some of its key members to hold speeches to ensure the quality of party campaigns was a fundamental of Nazism. Hitler presented an image of dynamism and youth through modern campaigning tactics such as flying to many cities during the 1931 elections, which were known as the Hitler over Germany campaign, and also holding mass rallies that unified the people at Nuremberg. The Nazi Party was the only party to make use of newer technologies such as radio and film to attract mass support. Leni Riefenstahl made Olympia after the 1936 Olympics, for example. There was strong support for a leader who would embody strength, defeat Germany's enemies, and expand the German Empire. And Goebbels constructed an image that represented a messianic character and an era of salvation and restored power. So in explaining this point, propaganda and its application was certainly an effective method through which the Nazis controlled the German state. Which brings us to our final point, point 4, the crushing of opposition. Again, there is plenty of evidence you can pick out to support this point. Of the 300,000 members of the Communist Party, half were arrested and 10% were killed. The People's Courts were controlled by the vicious Judge Freisler, and 90% of the cases that went to court ended in a death sentence. And so, communist resistance to the Nazi movement was fragmented. Historian Detlef Peukert has created a model of resistance, or Widerstand, which shows high-level and low-level resistance. There were other groups like the White Rose Group, who produced 5 anti-Nazi leaflets, and was headed by by Hans and Sophie Scholl. Sophie Scholl was a student at university who formed a resistance group with her brother called the White Rose in the summer of 1942. She helped to distribute illegally printed leaflets which encouraged resistance against the Nazis. On the 18th of February 1943, a caretaker discovered a leaflet and phoned the secret police. And on the 22nd of February, all 3 conspirators were sentenced to death and Sophie herself was beheaded. Another opposition group is that of Klaus Philipp Maria Graf von Stauffenberg and Karl Goerdeler, who were part of a plot to kill Adolf Hitler. Born into an aristocratic family, Stauffenberg joined the army in 1926. Famous for taking part in what became known as Operation Walküre, the attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler in July 1944. The plan failed and he was arrested and executed the following day. And following this attempt, nearly 5,000 people were arrested and 200 executed as a direct result of the assassination plot, due to possible affiliation. Sippenhaft was enacted. This was a law that held the entire Stauffenberg family liable for treason. And so in explaining this point, you could link this to terror and intimidation, our second point, and argue that the crushing of opposition was one way through which the Nazis controlled the German state. Okay, so we have argued that the Nazis did control the German state through the use of ideological appeal, terror and intimidation, propaganda, and by crushing any opposition. So now it's time for a clever conclusion. In answering this question, it's hereby argued that Hitler created a totalitarian state in which opposition was effectively suffocated. All of the factors above are interrelated, but this essay argues against Goldhagen's argument. There were pockets of resistance, but the all-encompassing nature of totalitarian methods crushed the seeds of flowering opposition. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I do hope you found this useful. If you did, feel free to follow me on Twitter at Mr. Guiney History, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel for further pieces of advice. Bye bye.